The sound of a gavel usually signifies justice. But in courtroom 4B, on a humid Tuesday in October, it sounded like a death knell. A man named Marvin Bennett stood trembling before the bench, tears streaming down his face, begging for the one thing every father deserves, a chance. But instead of mercy, he received something that chilled everyone in the room to the bone. Judge Harrison Sterling didn't listen. He didn't review the evidence. He leaned back in his leather chair, and he laughed. A cruel, echoing laugh that told Marvin his life was over. But Judge Sterling made one fatal mistake. He was so busy enjoying his power that he didn't hear the heavy oak doors at the back of the room click open. He had no idea who was about to walk in, and by the time he stopped laughing, it would be too late to save his career. The air in the Broward County Superior Court was thick enough to choke on. It was a mixture of stale coffee, floor wax, and the quiet, desperate sweat of people who knew their lives were being decided by strangers. But nowhere was the atmosphere more suffocating than in Judge Harrison Sterling's courtroom. Sterling was a fixture in the local judicial system, a man in his late 60s with silver hair slicked back, and a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite, and about as empathetic. He was known as the hangman among the public defenders. If you were poor, if you were a minority, and if you walked into Sterling's court without a high-priced lawyer, you were already guilty. The trial was just a formality. On the defendant's side stood Marvin Bennett. Marvin was 34, a mechanic with grease permanently stained into his fingernails, despite how hard he had scrubbed them that morning. He wore a suit that didn't fit, the sleeves too short, the shoulders too tight, bought from a thrift store specifically for this nightmare. Marvin wasn't a criminal. He was a father. A single father to a 6-year-old girl named Naya. His crime? According to the prosecution, he had embezzled $15,000 from the auto shop where he worked. The reality? Marvin had discovered the owner was cooking the books to avoid taxes. When Marvin threatened to report it, the owner flipped the script, planted cash in Marvin's locker, and called the police. It was a setup, a classic dirty frame job. But Marvin didn't have the money for a forensic accountant or a private investigator. He had Sarah Jenkins, a public defender who was handling 40 other cases that week and looked like she hadn't slept since 2018. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly as she stood up. "Mr. Bennett is a pillar of his community. He has no prior record. He is the sole provider for his young daughter. We have character witness statements from—" "Save it, Ms. Jenkins," Judge Sterling interrupted, his voice booming without the aid of the microphone. He didn't even look up from the papers on his desk. "I've read the file. Theft from an employer. Breach of trust. The evidence was found in his possession. It's an open and shut case." "But, Your Honor, the evidence was planted," Marvin blurted out. He couldn't stop himself. "I didn't take a dime. I've worked there for 5 years. I was trying to do the right thing." Sterling's head snapped up. His eyes, cold and blue, locked onto Marvin. The courtroom went silent. The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Officer Higgins, placed a hand on his taser. "Mr. Bennett," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you will speak when spoken to. Another outburst like that, and I will hold you in contempt faster than you can blink." Marvin gripped the wooden table, his knuckles turning white. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm terrified. If I go to jail, my daughter goes to foster care. She has no one else. Please." This was the moment where a judge is supposed to show humanity, to look at the context, to see the person, not just the docket number. Marvin felt the tears coming. He tried to hold them back, biting his lip until it tasted like iron, but the pressure was too much. A single tear rolled down his cheek, followed by another. His shoulders began to shake. He wasn't crying because he was weak. He was crying because he was terrified of losing Naya. He was crying because he was an innocent black man in a system that seemed designed to crush him. "I'm begging you," Marvin whispered, his voice cracking. "Please don't take me away from her." Judge Sterling looked at Marvin. He looked at the tears. He looked at the trembling hands. And then a smile curled on the judge's lips. It started as a chuckle, a dry sound in the back of his throat. Then it grew. Judge Sterling laughed. He actually laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a laugh of pure derision. He took off his glasses and wiped a speck of dust from them, shaking his head. "Oh, Mr. Bennett," Sterling chuckled, leaning into the microphone so his voice echoed through the room. "Spare me the theatrics. I've been on this bench for 20 years. Do you think a few tears are going to wash away the facts? Do you think crying makes you innocent? It just makes you look pathetic." The courtroom froze. Even the prosecutor, a shark named Thomas Grady, looked uncomfortable. You didn't laugh at a crying defendant. It was a violation of every ethical code. "Pathetic," Sterling repeated, enjoying the word. "You want sympathy? Go to a church. This is a court of law, and frankly, your performance is insulting my intelligence." Marvin felt his heart shatter. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. He lowered his head, the sobs coming harder now, racking his body. "Bailiff," Sterling commanded. "Prepare to take the defendant into custody pending sentencing. I'm revoking bail. I'm tired of looking at him." Judge Sterling raised his gavel, ready to strike the woodblock and seal Marvin's fate. He was smiling, a man completely drunk on his own power, untouchable in his kingdom. He raised the gavel high. Click. The sound came from the back of the courtroom. It wasn't a gavel. It was the heavy latch of the double mahogany doors. Judge Sterling paused, the gavel hovering in the air. He hated interruptions. "I said doors locked during sentencing," he barked, not looking up. "Officer Higgins, remove whoever just walked in." "I don't think Officer Higgins will be doing that. Harrison," a voice rang out. It was a female voice, calm, authoritative, steely. It cut through the tension in the room like a scalpel. Judge Sterling froze. He knew that voice, but it was impossible. That voice belonged to someone who was supposed to be in Washington, D.C., 1,000 miles away. Slowly, the judge lowered his arm. He looked up. Marvin looked back, wiping his eyes. The prosecutor turned around. Sarah Jenkins gasped. Standing in the center of the aisle was a woman in a sharp navy blue suit. She was older, perhaps in her 70s, but she stood with a posture that made her look 10 feet tall. Flanking her were 4 men in dark suits wearing earpieces, federal marshals, but it was the woman who mattered. "Who?" Sterling stammered, his face draining of color. "Hello, Judge," the woman said, walking forward. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the floor. Click, click, click. "I believe you were about to make a ruling. Don't let me stop you. I'm very interested to see how you handle this one." Judge Sterling's hand shook. He dropped the gavel. It clattered onto the desk, no longer a weapon of authority, but a piece of wood dropped by a scared man. He had no idea that the woman walking toward him was about to turn his entire world into ash. To understand why the air had suddenly left the room, you have to understand who had just walked in. The woman was Evelyn Vance. 20 years ago, Evelyn Vance had been a prosecutor in this very county. She was known as the Iron Lady. She was tough, brilliant, and unbribbable. She had risen through the ranks to become the state attorney general, and eventually she was appointed to the Federal Court of Appeals. She was a legend, a titan of the legal world. But more importantly, she was the woman who had mentored Harrison Sterling when he was a young, ambitious lawyer. She had made his career, and she knew exactly where the bodies were buried. However, Sterling hadn't seen her in a decade. Rumors were she had retired to the coast, or perhaps was battling illness. Seeing her here now, looking sharper than ever, was like seeing a ghost. But why was she here for a low-level theft case? Evelyn stopped at the wooden gate that separated the gallery from the court floor. She didn't ask permission to enter, she simply pushed it open. The squeak of the hinge sounded like a scream in the silence. "Madame Justice," Sterling stammered, finding his voice but losing his arrogance. I wasn't expecting you. To what do we owe the honor?" Evelyn ignored him. She turned her gaze to Marvin Bennett. Marvin was still trembling, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He looked at this stranger, confused. Was she here to help, or was she just another powerful person coming to watch him fall? Evelyn looked at Marvin with an expression that was unreadable. Then she looked at the prosecutor, Thomas Grady. "Mr. Grady," Evelyn said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried to every corner of the room. "I was reviewing the docket for this district. I found something very interesting about the case of State versus Bennett." Grady, usually smug, looked like he wanted to vomit. "Justice Vance, the evidence is substantial." "Is it?" Evelyn asked. She walked over to the defense table. Sarah Jenkins, Marvin's lawyer, immediately stepped aside, giving Evelyn space. Evelyn placed a manicured hand on the table, right next to Marvin. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly. "Stand up, son." Marvin stood, his legs wobbly. "Did you steal that money?" she asked him directly. "No, ma'am," Marvin said, his voice barely a whisper. "I swear on my daughter's life." Evelyn nodded slowly. She reached into her briefcase, a leather satchel held by one of the marshals, and pulled out a thick file. She slapped it onto the defense table. "Judge Sterling," Evelyn said, turning her attention back to the bench. "You were laughing a moment ago. I heard it from the hallway. You found Mr. Bennett's distress amusing." Sterling shifted in his seat. "I was merely pointing out that emotional displays do not substitute for facts, Justice Vance. I have a courtroom to control." "Facts," Evelyn repeated. "Let's talk about facts. Fact number 1. The auto shop owner, Mr. Kowalski, has 3 prior convictions for insurance fraud in the state of Nevada under a different name. Did you know that?" Sterling blinked. "That was not in the discovery." "Because the prosecution suppressed it," Evelyn said, her eyes drilling into the prosecutor, Grady. Grady looked at the floor. "Fact number 2, Evelyn continued, pacing the floor. "The cash found in Mr. Bennett's locker. No fingerprints were found on the envelope. None. Not even Mr. Bennett's. Which is strange, considering he supposedly handled it and hid it. But do you know whose fingerprints were found on the inside of the locker door, placed there recently?" She paused for effect. "The arresting officer, Deputy Miller, who happens to be the brother-in-law of the shop owner, Mr. Kowalski." A gasp went through the courtroom. Sarah Jenkins's eyes went wide. She hadn't known. The prosecution hadn't turned over the fingerprint analysis. "And finally," Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "Fact number 3. This morning, at 8 a.m., my team conducted a forensic audit of the judge's discretionary fund." Sterling's face went from pale to ghostly white. He gripped the arms of his chair so hard the leather creaked. "Excuse me," Sterling squeaked. "You audited my accounts?" "We found a recurring deposit," Evelyn said, ignoring his outrage. $5,000 a month, originating from a shell company registered to..." Thomas Grady's private law firm. The entire courtroom turned to look at the prosecutor. Grady was sweating profusely now. "Kickbacks," Evelyn said, the word hanging in the air like smoke. "Kickbacks for favorable rulings. Kickbacks for fast-tracking convictions so private prisons stay full. Kickbacks for ignoring the tears of innocent men." Marvin looked from Evelyn to the judge. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The system wasn't just broken, it was a criminal enterprise, and he had been caught in the gears. "This is preposterous," Sterling shouted, trying to regain control. He stood up, his robes flapping. "You have no jurisdiction here to barge in and make wild accusations. I am a superior court judge." "Sit down, Harrison," Evelyn barked. The command was so sharp that Sterling actually sat. "I am not just a federal judge," Evelyn said. "As of this morning, I have been granted special prosecutorial powers by the governor to investigate corruption in Broward County. This is a sting operation, Harrison, and you just walked right into it." She turned to the marshals. "Secure the exits. No one leaves." The doors were blocked. The panic set in. "But that's not the twist," Evelyn said, her voice softening as she looked back at Marvin. "The twist isn't that you're corrupt, Harrison. We suspected that for months. The twist is why I am here, personally." She walked over to Marvin and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "do you remember 3 years ago? A rainy night on I-95? A car had spun out and flipped into a ditch. It was catching fire." Marvin furrowed his brow, confused by the sudden change of topic. Yes, I remember. I was driving my tow truck. I saw the fire." "You didn't wait for the fire department," Evelyn said. "You ran down into the ditch. The driver was unconscious. You cut the seatbelt. You pulled the driver out seconds before the fuel tank exploded. You saved a life that night, and you left before the police even took your name. You just made sure the ambulance arrived, and you went back to work." Marvin nodded slowly. "I remember. I never knew who it was." Evelyn's eyes shimmered with tears. The iron exterior cracked just for a second. "That driver," Evelyn said, her voice trembling, "was my son." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "My son, David. He had a seizure at the wheel. He would have burned to death if you hadn't stopped. We spent 3 years looking for the angel of I-95. We only found you 2 days ago when your name popped up on this docket." She turned back to Judge Sterling. The look of hatred on her face was terrifying. "You laughed at him," Evelyn whispered. "You laughed at the man who saved my son's life. You laughed at a hero while you tried to destroy him for a few $1,000s in bribes." Sterling was trembling. He looked at Marvin, then at Evelyn. He realized, with a sickening thud in his stomach, that the game was over. I didn't know," Sterling whispered. "Ignorance is not a defense," Evelyn said coldly. She turned to the marshals. "Take Mr. Grady into custody for obstruction of justice and bribery." 2 marshals moved on the prosecutor, cuffing him before he could even protest. "And as for you, Judge Sterling," Evelyn said, "I can't arrest you yet. There is a process. But I can do this." She pulled a document from her file and slapped it on the clerk's desk. "This is an emergency order from the Supreme Court of Florida. Judge Harrison Sterling is hereby suspended, effective immediately, pending a federal investigation. You are removed from this bench." Evelyn pointed to the door behind the judge's chair. "Get out of that chair," she hissed. "You aren't fit to sit in it." The silence in courtroom 4B had shattered. It was replaced by a low, buzzing murmur that grew louder by the second, the sound of 100 people realizing they were witnessing history. Judge Harrison Sterling, the man who had ruled this district with an iron fist for 2 decades, stood behind his bench, his face a mask of purple rage. "I will not step down!" Sterling roared, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at Justice Evelyn Vance. "This is a coup! You are overstepping your bounds, Evelyn. I have friends in the Senate. I have friends in the governor's mansion." Evelyn didn't blink. She stood her ground, looking up at the high bench where Sterling stood. To everyone else, he looked like a giant. To her, he looked like a petulant child. "Your friends are the ones who authorized this, Harrison," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a chilly calm. "Do you think the governor wants to be associated with a judge who takes bribes from private prisons? Do you think the Senate wants to protect a man who laughs at innocent fathers? Your friends threw you to the wolves the moment I showed them the bank transfers. You are alone." Sterling looked around the room. He looked at the court reporter, who was typing furiously, capturing every word of his downfall. He looked at Officer Higgins, his loyal bailiff. "Higgins!" Sterling barked. "Arrest this woman for contempt of court. Remove her." Officer Higgins, a man who had served Sterling for 10 years, looked at the judge. Then he looked at the 4 federal marshals standing behind Evelyn, their hands resting near their waistbands. Higgins was not a smart man, but he had a survival instinct. Slowly, deliberately, Officer Higgins took a step away from the bench. He folded his arms across his chest. "I can't do that, Judge," Higgins rumbled. You traitor!" Sterling screamed. "Harrison," Evelyn said, checking her watch. "You have 10 seconds to vacate the bench voluntarily. If you do not, the marshals will assist you, and I promise you, they will not be gentle. They've read the file on Marvin Bennett. They aren't fans of yours right now." Sterling looked at the marshals. One of them, a towering man with a scar on his chin, cracked his knuckles. The fight left Harrison Sterling, his shoulders slumped. The arrogance that had sustained him for 20 years evaporated, leaving behind a small, scared old man. He fumbled with the zipper of his black robe. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the tab down. Finally, he ripped it off, buttons popping and pinging onto the wooden floor. He threw the heavy black fabric onto his chair, a pile of dead authority. He stepped down from the dais. "This isn't over," Sterling hissed as he passed Evelyn. "I have money. I have lawyers who make you look like a public defender. I will bury you." "Save your money," Evelyn whispered back, loud enough for Marvin to hear. "You're going to need it for the commissary." 2 marshals flanked Sterling, grabbing him by the upper arms. They didn't cuff him yet, but the grip was firm, bordering on painful. They marched him down the center aisle. The gallery, filled with families of other defendants waiting for their hearings, stood up. These were people Sterling had terrorized, poor families, minorities, people who had been crushed by his swift justice. Someone from the back row booed, then another. Then a woman shouted, "Goodbye, hangman!" The chant started low and grew into a roar. "Hangman! Hangman! Hangman!" Sterling kept his head down, his face burning as he was marched out of his own kingdom. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, cutting off the noise, but the vibration of the crowd's anger could still be felt through the floorboards. Evelyn turned back to the room. She walked over to the court clerk. "Dismiss the charges against Marvin Bennett," she ordered. "With prejudice. This case is dead." The clerk nodded vigorously, stamping the file. "Dismissed." Evelyn turned to Marvin. He was still standing at the defense table, holding onto the edge as if the floor were moving. Sarah Jenkins, his lawyer, was crying silently, a hand over her mouth. "Mr. Bennett," Evelyn said softly. "You're free." Marvin looked at her. The words didn't make sense at first. 5 minutes ago, he was going to prison for 5 years. Now the judge was gone, and he was free. Marvin choked out. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." "No, Marvin," Evelyn said, her eyes glistening. "You saved my son. I'm just balancing the scales." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. It wasn't a government card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with a gold-embossed number. "This is my private number," she said, pressing it into his grease-stained hand. "This isn't over. Sterling is a vindictive man. He will try to strike back. If anything, and I mean anything, feels wrong, you call me. Day or night." "I just want to go home," Marvin whispered. "I just want to see Naya." "Go," Evelyn said. "Go to your daughter." Marvin didn't run, but he walked fast. He walked past the stunned prosecutor, Thomas Grady, who was currently being read his Miranda rights by the other two marshals. He walked past the gallery, where people patted him on the back. He burst through the double doors and into the hallway. The air in the hallway was cooler, cleaner. He took the stairs 2 at a time, bypassing the elevator. He burst out of the courthouse front doors and into the bright Florida sunlight. It was blinding. It was beautiful. He ran down the steps to the bus stop, but he didn't wait for the bus. He ran. He ran 4 blocks to the elementary school. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but he didn't care. He arrived at the schoolyard fence just as the recess bell rang. Children poured out onto the playground. Marvin scanned the sea of faces, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he saw her, Naya. She was wearing her pink backpack, sitting alone on a bench, looking at her shoes. She looked so small, so fragile. "Naya!" Marvin screamed, his voice breaking. The little girl looked up. Her eyes went wide. She dropped her bag and ran toward the fence. "Daddy!" Marvin fell to his knees on the grass. Naya collided with him, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. He buried his face in her hair, smelling the strawberry shampoo he had used that morning, sobbing uncontrollably. "I thought you weren't coming back," Naya whispered. "I'm here, baby," Marvin cried, holding her tighter than he ever had. "I'm never leaving you again. Never." But as Marvin held his daughter, basking in the sun of his freedom, a black sedan with tinted windows rolled slowly past the school. Inside, a man with a camera snapped a picture of the reunion. He checked the image on the screen, nodded, and dialed a number. "Target acquired," the man in the car said. "He thinks he's safe." On the other end of the line, Harrison Sterling's voice was calm, cold, and terrifying. "Good. Let him have his night. Let him feel safe. And then we begin." 3 days passed. To the public, it seemed like justice had been served. The news cycle was dominated by the Judge Sterling scandal. Videos of his removal from the courtroom had gone viral, racking up millions of views. Pundits were debating judicial reform. Thomas Grady, the prosecutor, had already cut a plea deal, singing like a canary about the kickback scheme to save his own skin. But Harrison Sterling was not in a jail cell. Sterling was a wealthy man. He had assets hidden in offshore accounts, favors owed to him by powerful people he hadn't blackmailed yet, and a legal team that cost $5,000 an hour. He had posted the $2 million bail within 3 hours of his arrest. He was currently sitting in the study of his sprawling estate in the exclusive Hidden Hills gated community. The room smelled of old leather and expensive cigars, but the air was tense. Sterling sat in a high-backed armchair, swirling a glass of amber scotch. Opposite him sat a man who didn't look like a lawyer. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, but his eyes were dead. They were the eyes of a shark. This was Victor Thorne. Thorne wasn't a hitman. That was too crude. Thorne was a fixer. He was the man you called when you needed a problem to disappear without leaving a trace. He specialized in psychological warfare, in destroying reputations, in making people wish they were dead so they would do whatever was asked of them. "The situation is delicate, Judge," Thorne said, his voice a smooth baritone. "Evelyn Vance has the governor's ear. If we touch Marvin Bennett physically, the federal marshals will rain hellfire on us. They are watching him." "I don't want him dead, Victor," Sterling sneered, taking a sip of scotch. "Death is too easy. I want him discredited. I want him destroyed. Evelyn Vance's entire case rests on the narrative that Bennett is a saint, and I am a villain. If Bennett turns out to be a monster, then her crusade looks like a witch hunt. The public turns on her. The charges against me lose their moral weight." "And how do you propose we make a saint look like a monster?" Thorne asked. Sterling smiled. It was the same cruel smile he had worn in the courtroom. "Every man has a breaking point. Marvin Bennett is a single father, barely scraping by. He loves that little girl. That is his weakness. We don't attack him. We attack his ability to be a father." Thorne nodded slowly, understanding the assignment. "CPS?" "Better," Sterling said. "We plant doubt. We create a scenario where he looks unstable, dangerous. We make the public fear him. And then we offer him a choice: confess that he lied about the bribe to get a lighter sentence, or lose his daughter forever." Later that evening, Marvin was in his small apartment, making grilled cheese sandwiches for Naya. The mood was lighter than it had been in years. The weight of the impending trial was gone. Evelyn Vance checked in daily via text. Marvin felt protected. "Daddy, can we watch a movie?" Naya asked, swinging her legs at the kitchen table. "After homework, Bug," Marvin smiled, flipping the sandwich. There was a knock at the door. Marvin froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. He glanced at the clock. 7:30 p.m. "Stay there, Naya," Marvin said, his voice dropping. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked to the door. He looked through the peephole. It was a woman. She looked young, dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a hoodie. She looked distressed. Marvin unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" "Please," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "My car. It broke down just outside. My phone is dead. Can I just use your charger for 5 minutes? I'm scared to be out there alone." Marvin hesitated. His instinct was to help. That was who he was. That was the man who saved Evelyn's son. But the paranoia from the trial was still fresh. "I can call a tow truck for you," Marvin said through the crack. "Please," she begged. "I just need to call my mum. I'm really freaked out." Marvin looked at her. She seemed harmless. He sighed and undid the chain. "Okay. Leave the door open, though." He let her in. She walked into the living room, clutching her phone. "Thank you so much," she said. She looked around the apartment, her eyes scanning the room quickly, too quickly. She spotted Naya at the table. "Hi there," the woman said to Naya with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi," Naya said shyly. "Here," Marvin said, handing her a charging cable. "Plug it in over there." The woman plugged her phone in. She stood there for a moment, waiting for it to power up. "You have a nice place," she said. "Just you and your daughter?" "Yeah," Marvin said, standing between the woman and Naya. "Just us." "Must be hard," she said, "being a single dad. Money tight, stressful." "We do okay," Marvin said, his guard going up. "Is your phone on yet?" The woman looked at her phone. Then she looked at Marvin. The fear on her face vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating smirk. "You know," she said, "I have a friend who works at the auto shop you used to work at. He says you have a temper." Marvin stiffened. "Who are you?" The woman unplugged her phone. She didn't call anyone. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, clear Ziploc bag containing a white powder. Before Marvin could react, she moved with lightning speed. She tossed the bag behind the sofa cushions. "What are you doing?" Marvin shouted, stepping forward. "Get out!" he roared. The woman laughed. She backed toward the door. "Oops, looks like you dropped something, Marvin. Better hope the police don't come by for a welfare check tonight." She opened the door. "Tell Judge Sterling I said hello," she whispered. Then she slammed the door and ran. Marvin stood frozen. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. He rushed to the sofa and frantically dug behind the cushions. He found the bag. It looked like cocaine, maybe heroin, enough to send him away for 20 years, enough to get Naya taken by CPS immediately. He stared at the bag in his hand. They were setting him up again. But this time, it wasn't in a locker at work. It was in his home. Bang, bang, bang. Heavy fists pounded on the front door seconds later. "Police! Open up! Search warrant!" Marvin's blood ran cold. It was a trap. A perfectly timed, coordinated trap. If they found him holding the bag, he was done. If he flushed it, they might find residue. He looked at Naya. She was terrified, eyes wide. "Daddy?" she whimpered. The door shook as a battering ram hit it. They weren't waiting for him to open it. Marvin had seconds. He couldn't hide it. He couldn't flush it in time. He looked at the window. It was the second floor. Beneath it was the dumpster for the apartment complex. Crack! The doorframe splintered. Marvin sprinted to the window, opened it, and threw the bag as hard as he could toward the open dumpster below. It disappeared into the trash just as the front door flew off its hinges. 4 police officers in tactical gear stormed in, guns drawn. "On the ground, now!" Marvin dropped to his knees, hands behind his head. "Don't shoot! My daughter is here! Don't shoot!" One officer slammed Marvin into the floor, cuffing him tight. Another officer went straight to the sofa, straight to where the woman had planted the drugs. He ripped the cushions off. "Clear here!" the officer shouted, sounding confused. He checked underneath. Nothing. The lead officer, a man with a thick mustache who smelled of stale cigarettes, grabbed Marvin by the hair and pulled his face up. "Where is it, Bennett?" the officer hissed. "We know it's here. An anonymous tip said you were dealing out of this apartment." "I don't know what you're talking about," Marvin panted, his cheek pressed against the carpet. The officer signaled his men. "Tear this place apart." For an hour, they destroyed the apartment. They emptied drawers, ripped open cereal boxes, overturned mattresses. Naya screamed and cried in the corner until a female officer took her outside to a patrol car. Marvin watched his home being violated, his heart breaking for his daughter. But a small spark of hope remained. They hadn't found the bag. Finally, the lead officer stood over Marvin. He was sweating and angry. They had found nothing. "You got lucky, Bennett," the officer spat. "Real lucky, but we'll be watching. One slip up, one jaywalking ticket, and you're mine." They uncuffed him and left, leaving the apartment in ruins. The door was broken. The food was on the floor. Marvin crawled to the door and looked out. He saw the police cars driving away. He saw Naya standing on the sidewalk, looking lost. He ran down to get her, scooping her up and bringing her back into the wreckage of their home. He sat on the floor, holding her, rocking back and forth. They were safe for tonight. But he knew this was just the beginning. Sterling could reach him anywhere. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. It was a text from an unknown number. That was a warning. "Next time we find it in the girl's backpack at school, recant your statement against the judge. Say you lied. Or Naya pays the price." Marvin stared at the screen. A cold fury began to replace the fear. They had crossed a line. They had threatened his child. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the cream-colored card Evelyn Vance had given him. "If anything feels wrong, call me." Marvin dialed the number. It rang once. "This is Vance," her voice answered, crisp and alert. "It's Marvin," he said, his voice deadly serious. "They just kicked in my door, and they threatened Naya." There was a pause on the other end. When Evelyn spoke again, her voice was no longer that of a judge. It was the voice of a general going to war. "Pack a bag, Marvin," Evelyn said. "Get Naya. I'm sending a car. You aren't safe there." "Where are we going?" "To the one place Harrison Sterling can't reach you," Evelyn said. "My house." "And Marvin?" "Yes. Tell me exactly what happened, because Harrison Sterling just made the last mistake of his life." The car that picked Marvin and Naya up wasn't a taxi. It was a black armored SUV with government plates. 2 federal marshals sat in the front, silent and professional. They drove through the night, leaving the city lights behind, heading toward the wealthy coastal district of Jupiter Island. Naya had fallen asleep in Marvin's lap, clutching her pink backpack like a shield. Marvin stroked her hair, his hand still shaking from the adrenaline of the police raid. He kept looking out the rear window, expecting to see headlights following them, expecting Sterling's reach to extend even here. But there was only darkness. They pulled up to a massive iron gate, flanked by security cameras. The driver punched in a code, and the gate swung open. They drove up a long, winding driveway lined with palm trees until a sprawling white mansion came into view. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Waiting on the front steps, bathed in the warm light of the porch, was Evelyn Vance. Standing next to her was a young man in his late 20s, leaning on a cane. The SUV stopped. The marshal opened the door. "Welcome, Marvin," Evelyn said, her voice softer than it had been in the courtroom. "You're safe here. This property has 24-hour security detail." Marvin stepped out, carrying the sleeping Naya. "I don't know what to say, Justice Vance. They tore my apartment apart. They planted drugs." "I know," Evelyn said grimly. "Victor Thorne's work. He's a blunt instrument, but effective. He wanted to scare you into submission, but he made a tactical error." "What error?" "He made it personal," Evelyn said. She turned to the young man beside her. "Marvin, I'd like you to meet someone." The young man stepped forward, limping slightly. He had a kind face, though scarring was visible along his hairline, a reminder of the crash 3 years ago. "Mr. Bennett," the young man said, extending a hand, "I'm David. You pulled me out of a burning car on I-95. Marvin shifted Naya's weight to one arm and shook David's hand. The grip was strong. "I remember," Marvin said quietly. "You were hurt bad." "I was dead," David corrected him. "You brought me back. My mother told me everything. I want you to know, whatever you need, whatever it takes to bury the man who did this to you, we are in. You are family now." It was the first time in years Marvin felt like he wasn't fighting the world alone. Inside, the house was quiet and safe. A housekeeper took Naya to a guest room that had been prepared with teddy bears and warm blankets, David's old room. Marvin finally sat down in the library with Evelyn and the lead marshal, a man named Agent Walker. "We have a problem, Marvin," Agent Walker said, laying a tablet on the coffee table. "We know Sterling is behind the raid. We know he hired Victor Thorne. But knowing it and proving it in court are 2 different things." "I have the text message," Marvin said. "The threat about Naya's backpack." "Burner phone," Walker shook his head. "Untraceable. And Thorne is a ghost. If we arrest him now, he keeps his mouth shut. Sterling pays his legal bills, and nothing changes. Sterling remains free to come after you again in 6 months." Marvin felt the cold dread return. "So what do we do?" I can't live like this. I can't hide forever. Evelyn leaned forward, the firelight dancing in her eyes. We don't hide. We hunt. Sterling thinks he has you cornered. He thinks you are a terrified, poor mechanic who is about to break. We are going to use that arrogance against him. How? You are going to accept his deal, Evelyn said. Marvin stared at her. What? You're going to text that number back, Evelyn explained. You're going to tell them you'll do it. You'll recant your testimony. You'll sign whatever they want. But you demand a meeting to ensure Naya's safety. You demand to meet the man in charge. Sterling won't show up, Agent Walker said. He's too smart. He'll send Thorne. Exactly, Evelyn smiled. And Thorne is the key. Thorne is the bridge. If we can get Thorne on tape, admitting that he is acting on Sterling's specific orders, detailed orders, we can flip him. Thorne isn't loyal. He's a mercenary. If he faces 20 years for witness tampering and planting narcotics, and we offer him immunity to give up the judge, he'll sing. But I have to meet him? Marvin asked. Face to face? Yes, Evelyn said. It's dangerous. Thorne is violent, but we will be listening. We will be watching. We'll wire you up. Marvin looked down at his hands. He thought about the drugs in his apartment. He thought about the threat to put cocaine in Naya's school bag. He thought about the fear in his daughter's eyes. He looked up at Evelyn. When do we do it? The trap was set at Sal's 24-hour stop, a greasy diner on the edge of town. It was 11 p.m. on a rainy Thursday, the kind of night where the shadows seemed long and heavy. Marvin Bennett sat in a back booth, nursing a cold coffee. Under his oversized hoodie, a high-fidelity wire was taped to his chest. Across the street, in a black surveillance van, Evelyn Vance and Agent Walker watched the monitors, their breath held tight in their chests. The bell above the door jingled. Victor Thorne walked in. He didn't look like a hitman. He looked like an accountant in a beige raincoat. But his eyes were dead, shark eyes that scanned the room for exits before he slid into the booth opposite Marvin. You look tired, Marvin, Thorne said smoothly, ignoring the menu. You kicked in my door, Marvin replied, his voice trembling just enough to sell the fear. You terrified my daughter. I didn't do anything, Thorne smirked. But accidents happen. The drugs were a warning. Next time, maybe it's a fire or a car crash. Marvin gripped the table. I'm here to deal. I just want it to stop. Thorne slid a blue folder across the table. Sign this. It's a sworn affidavit stating you lied about the bribe. You admit you framed the judge, you take the perjury charge, go to prison for a year, and your daughter stays safe. Marvin opened the folder. The lies were written in perfect legalese. If I sign this, Marvin said, looking up, how do I know you won't hurt Naya anyway? You don't, Thorne said, cold, but if you don't sign, I guarantee we will. I need to know it's over, Marvin pressed, remembering the script Evelyn had given him. I need to hear it from him, the judge. Does he know about this? Thorne laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You think Harrison Sterling is going to chat with a grease monkey? Then call him, Marvin challenged, pushing the folder back. Put him on speaker. I want to hear him say the girl is safe if I sign. Otherwise, no deal. Thorne hesitated. He saw the desperation in Marvin's face and mistook it for defeat. He pulled out a burner phone and dialed. Yes? The voice on the speaker was unmistakable. It was Harrison Sterling. I'm with the mechanic, Thorne said. He wants your personal assurance. If he signs, is the girl off limits? There was a pause. In the van outside, Evelyn leaned toward the screen. This was it. Put him on, Sterling commanded. Thorne slid the phone toward Marvin. Judge Sterling, Marvin asked, his heart hammering against the wire. Listen closely, Mr. Bennett. Sterling's voice oozed through the speaker, arrogant and clear. You are an ant beneath my boot. Sign the paper. Take the charge. If you refuse, I will make sure Victor finishes what he started at your apartment. Do we understand each other?" "Yes," Marvin said. "I understand. You're ordering me to lie under threat of violence." "I'm ordering you to disappear," Sterling snapped. "Sign it." "We got it," Agent Walker yelled in the van. "Conspiracy and witness tampering. Go! Go! Go!" In the diner, Marvin looked Thorne in the eye. "I'm not signing anything." Thorne's face dropped. He reached for the gun in his waistband, but he was too late. "Federal agents!" The diner's cook vaulted over the counter with a shotgun. The couple in the corner booth drew Glocks. The front door burst open as a SWAT team flooded the room. Thorne froze, surrounded, and slowly raised his hands. Marvin slumped back, exhaling a week's worth of fear. He looked at the phone, still connected. "Did you hear that, Judge?" Silence. Then a frantic click. 30 minutes later, at the Hidden Hills estate, Harrison Sterling was in a panic. He had heard the shouting over the phone. He knew it was over. He threw stacks of cash and diamonds into a briefcase, his hands shaking violently. He had a private plane on standby for the Caymans. "I am the law," he muttered maniacally to himself. "They can't touch me." He sprinted to his garage, jumped into his Porsche, and hit the button for the door. As the garage door rose, Sterling revved the engine, ready to peel out and leave his life behind. But he slammed on the brakes. Blocking the driveway, sitting sideways in the moonlight, was an old, battered tow truck. Sterling honked furiously. "Move! Get out of the way!" Then, floodlights blinded him. Red and blue strobe lights erupted from the bushes, the street, and the sky. A loudspeaker boomed. "Harrison Sterling, exit the vehicle." Sterling sat paralyzed. The symbol of the working man, the very man he had mocked, was physically blocking his escape. He watched helplessly as federal marshals smashed his window and dragged him out onto the concrete. "You're hurting me!" Sterling screamed, his face pressed into the oil-stained driveway. "I am a judge." "You have the right to remain silent," a voice said above him. Sterling looked up. Standing over him was Evelyn Vance, looking like an avenging angel. "Use it, Harrison," she whispered. "You'll need to save your voice for the jury." Behind the police line, Sterling saw one more figure. Marvin Bennett. He stood quietly, watching the man who had tried to destroy him being cuffed. Marvin didn't smile. He just nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that the scales were finally balanced, and turned to go home to his daughter. 6 months later, the trial of the People versus Harrison Sterling concluded. It had been a national spectacle, but the courtroom was silent as the jury returned. Sterling sat in the defendant's chair, unrecognizable. The silver hair was thin and stringy, the expensive suit replaced by a baggy orange jumpsuit. He looked small, shriveled. "Guilty," the foreman read. 24 times. Racketeering, bribery, conspiracy. Sterling collapsed into his chair, sobbing loudly. "Please," he blubbered, looking at the bench. "I'm an old man. I served for 20 years. Show mercy." Judge Miriam Cale, a woman known for absolute fairness, adjusted her glasses. She looked at Sterling, then at Marvin Bennett, sitting in the front row. "You ask for mercy," Judge Kyle said, her voice cutting through the room. "But the court recalls the testimony regarding Mr. Bennett. When he stood before you, innocent and terrified, begging for the sake of his 6-year-old daughter, you laughed." The courtroom froze. "You laughed at a father's pain," she continued. "That laugh revealed a soul devoid of humanity. The law does not offer mercy to those who weaponize it." She raised her gavel. "Harrison Sterling, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." Bam! The gavel struck like a thunderclap. As bailiffs dragged a screaming Sterling away, Marvin felt a heavy weight finally lift from his chest. Evelyn Vance squeezed his hand. "It's over, Marvin." Life in prison was its own form of justice. Sterling was placed in general population. On his first day in the yard, he sat alone in a corner, shivering. 3 large inmates approached him. "If it isn't the hangman," one said, "you sent me here for 15 years for a crime I didn't do. I cried in your court. You told me my tears were pathetic." The inmates circled him. They didn't hit him. They just pointed. And then they started to laugh. It was a cruel, echoing sound. Sterling curled into a ball, covering his ears, but he couldn't block it out. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, haunted by the laughter he had once used as a weapon. 1 year later. The sun set over a freshly painted building on Main Street. The sign read, "Bennett and Vance Automotive." Marvin wiped his hands on a rag, watching the bustling shop. He had used the settlement money to build this, a partnership with David, Evelyn's son. "Daddy!" A 7-year-old Naya ran out of the office, waving a report card. "Straight A's!" Marvin scooped her up, spinning her around. "That's my girl." A black car pulled up, and Evelyn Vance stepped out. She smiled, watching the reunion. "I think that deserves ice cream. My treat." "Can we, Daddy?" Naya asked. "Go ahead, baby," Marvin smiled. "I'll lock up." As he watched his daughter walk away, holding the hand of the former judge who had saved them, Marvin thought back to that day in the courtroom. He thought of Sterling's arrogance. He thought of the moment he almost gave up. He looked at his shop. He looked at his family. He realized that Sterling's attempt to bury him had been his greatest mistake. Marvin looked up at the sky and whispered to the memory of the man rotting in a cell. "You thought you were burying me," Marvin smiled, "but you didn't know I was a seed." He locked the door and walked into the sunlight, a free man. And that is the story of how a single cruel laugh brought down a corrupt empire. Judge Sterling thought he was a god in his courtroom, untouchable and all-powerful. He thought Marvin Bennett was just another number, another pathetic man to be crushed. But he forgot the most important rule of nature. When you push a good man too far, and when you mock the innocent, the universe has a way of balancing the scales. Sterling is now sitting in a cell, listening to the echoes of his own cruelty, while Marvin is living the life he fought so hard to protect. It's a reminder to all of us. Arrogance is a fragile shield, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the light. Be kind, be fair, because you never know who is about to walk through that door. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new episode. What do you think? Did Judge Sterling get what he deserved? Or was life in prison too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.